Hi, Chris DeLeon. I'm back. Now this one's a continuation of the previous video on dynamic website generation for LMC 6313 at Georgia Tech. That is, once again to remind you, Principles of Interactive Design. Oftentimes these videos I try to start out from scratch and we keep building up, and sometimes if we have to review the first part, we just do it because it's good for us to do that kind of review. But in this case, we're definitely starting off exactly from where we left off in the previous video. So if you're coming into this one fresh, I ask you please go back a video and you'll get caught up on exactly where we're at. Because first of all, we created our database, which if you're a student, we have a self-serve server to do. We then went into PHP MyAdmin for it. Now, even if you're not a student here, there's outside services you can get a hold of that allow you to spin up databases in MySQL and access them with PHP MyAdmin pre-installed. And then we created a couple of sample entries. And next up, we're going to combine this video with the contents of the earlier ones in terms of using PHP to dynamically access the entries from the database, to list what's there, to filter it, and so on. Now to do that, as we always do, we're first of all going to need access to an FTP space. If you're a student at Georgia Tech, as always, you can do it in your Project Handin folder as a test area, because you know that's a site where PHP is running. If you're not a student here, you've got access to your own web space, hopefully, or if you're locally running a server that you've installed PHP on and you know what you're doing, good shape, no worries there either. You can Google how to do that if you need to. So we're going to create a new folder for this, just as a demonstration. We're going to call this PHP SQL demo. And as I always like to do, I like to make sure first that the web page I'm going to in my browser, the URL is what I think it is. Because if that's wrong, nothing else is going to matter. So I've got myself a blank text file. On a Mac, I always duplicate a previous one. On Windows, you could, right-click new file. I put just some basic words in there, words and stuff and things. Save. I then upload it to my folder on the server. You see the transfer is complete. I'm using CyberDuck. You, of course, can use FileZilla or WinSCP or whatever FTP client strikes your fancy. And now I want to go to the URL where I have reason to believe that file is. And, of course, I have the advantage here of knowing the server space. There we go. Your URL is going to be different depending if you put it inside your student Handin folder, if you put it inside of your personal www space like I did, or of course if you're not a student at Georgia Tech and you're putting it somewhere else entirely on the web. It's just important that you have a URL mapping to where you've placed your file on the server. And I like putting a text file there to make sure there's no complication about PHP parsing or anything like that. Now the next step, let's go ahead and get rid of this local file so we don't get mixed up or confused. If you need to make changes to that and keep uploading it over the one on the server because your FTP client's not set up to do what I'm going to show you, do what you got to do. But of course, it's way better to, first of all, we're going to rename that to main.php. Let's name it index. Of course, again, like I mentioned before in previous videos, the server by default looks for index when we go to a folder. So your main PHP file should really be index.php. And then ideally you can edit it in Text Wrangler or in TextEdit or in something equivalent on if you're on PC, and then be able to have the changes automatically saved and reflect on the server. When you save the local temporary file that you open up through the FTP client, we want to see the changes on the site. And certain clients, I believe FileZilla, for example, you might need to click onto the FTP client first, click yes to confirm that you want to upload the version, then you can refresh in the browser. Notice too, of course, so let's see, updated, just to make sure that the new file is updating, saved it. We do need to update our URL because I was going to blank.txt and our file is now named index.php. And because the FTP connection is working to my local files updates, updated ASDF, reset, there we go. Okay, so we're in good shape to get started with our SQL interactions. Now, something at the top, before we start doing our PHP, echo PHP goes here. Let me increase my font size a little bit so you can see a little bit better. I guess we don't really need that FTP space. I know you can, like I mentioned in the previous video, you can always use the gear in YouTube to get HD 720 quality video out of this to make sure you can see everything. But I realize some of you are probably working in a window, so I'm going to try to embiggen my text a bit and see if that helps. I like to always put something at the top that's not PHP when we have a predominantly PHP file we're testing, so that if something goes awry and it's just a blank page, I know I should expect to see something at the top, literally in this case, as opposed to nothing at all. And it's just a little test. I'm going to put a break line there, so it's going to the next line. Okay. Now let's begin by writing a function that we're going to use to access our PHP. And we're going to move this into its own file soon, but for starters, let's just put it right here in our main file. Notice, by the way, that I didn't lose my closing space. PHP needs a opening tag and a closing tag. We can have arbitrarily many PHP tags in our code. I like to call mine query_db, sort of a general function. We'll give it an argument, which we're going to call SQL action. As always, I put my open and close brace before I fill in the inside so I don't get lost and forget. $DB host equals, let's see, db.iac.tech.edu. That, of course, will be different if you're not using the self-serve Georgia Tech database system, but if you are using the database self-serve system that I am, then that's how we're going to do it. Equals cdelion3. Oh, where did I get this? Oh, so for this, actually, I'm going to leave these fields blank for a moment. We're going to need multiple values to get this thing started up. Username, password. And I'll tell you right now, these come from the database list page, where it lists out the database you've created, along with the database name, username, and password. I'll fill mine in here in just a moment. I don't want to do it yet because I'm on the screen. I'll have to blue it out and that sort of thing to keep my password from floating around. We're then going to establish a connection, and we're going to use the equal sign here to maintain a handle on the return value. That's going to allow us to check for errors, which is going to be very likely. I'm going to change my font size a bit. And SQL Connect wants the host, comma, it wants the username, and again, you should fill these in with yours. Your DB name, your username, your password. And as a reminder too, especially for tech students, these are not your Georgia Tech credentials that you use for T-Square and for email and so on. These are specifically the ones from that db.iac.tech.edu manage website. So DB host, it also wants to know the username, and it wants to know the password. As a reminder, PHP, like a lot of programming, is case sensitive. So if you're sloppy about capitalizing things where they shouldn't be, it's going to cause you problems. Another reminder about PHP. Unfortunately, it's a very strict kind of environment in which if you make kind of almost any kind of error, it can come back and catch up to you in terms of just giving you a white page. We can turn on the errors. They're so often not helpful. I actually don't even bother in my own work oftentimes. But just as a reminder, be careful. I'm also going to make a version of this file generically, probably downloadable. If you look in the details for this video, I'll try to include a link to that in some sort of easy to host space. So if connect not connection, I'm not going to use the bang there. If connection equals false, meaning we didn't connect, echo db error code. Remember, period, not plus signs, do concatenations in PHP. MySQL error. And MySQL error is going to print out whatever the error was that was encountered by MySQL Connect. I'm then going to use die to stop the page from loading any further. And first of all, because we're going to be typing lots of PHP here, I'm just going to go ahead and save. Again, I'm counting on updating on the server. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of text down at the bottom. Sprinkles. Just to make sure that my page is being updated. When I refresh, I should still see something at the top. Sprinkles. Nothing in the middle yet because we're not yet echoing anything. But we have this attempt now for an SQL connection. And as a reminder, when we check the PHP source, we shouldn't actually expect to see that stuff because we're only going to see code echoed back from the server. Else, meaning that our connection did not fail, we're going to take it a layer deeper, and we're going to say $db select equals MySQL select db. And even though I'm making this file available for download, I really encourage, if you've never typed this sort of thing before, I think it's helpful practice just to get through typing it at least once in your lifetime. Some sort of error checking code, so when you have to end up doing it for yourself, you've got some practice at it. You got a sense for it's not that weird. It's really helpful and save your life a bunch, save your skin. Could not select. Error was period MySQL error. So in this case, it's going to try to select the specific database. Notice that we didn't even specify which database in the original connection command. That's just host, username, and password. Then we want to select onto the database. Specifically, in our case, like we have contacts is the one we made in the previous video. And so if db, oh, I forgot my bang. I should have put a bang there, precisely because that bang, or the exclamation point, so easy to miss. Equals false is a handy way to be more explicit about it. Now we have a nestled else case. We're starting to bury ourselves a lot of ifs and else's deep. So I'm going to go ahead and comment on those. db select was successful. Else. And this one corresponds to connection was successful. And I want to not forget my bottom one, end of function query db. And you know, if you haven't seen me do this in the other videos before, I find this is a really helpful way when I start having stacks of indented braces to keep track of when there's a series of closing ones. Okay, which one corresponds to what? So if I go back into insert, change, move code around, I know where I'm at and what I'm dealing with. So far, we know we've survived the connection, we've survived the selection, and now we are in a position to really do something with it. $result equals, here's where we do the actual MySQL query call. $SQL action. SQL action here is the name of the variable we passed in. In fact, I'm going to copy and paste that to make double sure there's no chance that I messed up a capitalization or something that could drive us nuts. Messed up one of my students the other day for easily 2 hours. Or is it was kind of a try-catch type case, if you're familiar with that from Java. Or die, sorry about the background noise, it's a side effect of recording in the middle of campus, middle of the day. Error. .MySQL error, once again, period. And let's see, we can actually, in this case we can even put more information because of the nature of the error that's going to come out of this. I'm going to go to the next line after that period. In addition to the MySQL error, we can also do MySQL error no. That'll give us the number of the error that was encountered. And I think that looks good. We'll put a semicolon after it. And basically, this is going to try to do the query, and if the query fails, it's going to stop the page and spit out that error. It's basically just another format for this nestling we've already been doing up to this point. Now at this point, we've retrieved the result. So let's go ahead and close our connection to the database so we don't leave a bunch of database connections lingering. And then we're going to return $result so we can then use this function. The goal of this function we've just written, which there's a version in the going to be linked to in the description, is that we can hand it a line of SQL code. So give me 30 entries back from the context database. Order them by last name. Give me the entries in the database that have developers for a certain game project corresponding to a certain game team. And it would give me back those results as the result data passed back from this function when all I pass in is the SQL syntax indicating what I want to search for, update, insert, delete, or so on. So that's our function. Even though we're not calling it yet, I'm still going to refresh. I'm going to have some updated sprinkles. I'm going to refresh the page just to make sure I don't get a blank page. Because if I had a typo somewhere, if I missed a letter, oh, no harm there. If I have a typo someplace, just an obvious typo, we're going to get a server error if you're in Chrome, or some equivalent, page not found, or so on, depending on what browser you're in. Nature of PHP, you got to look for those typos, find the issues. And now granted, I don't expect that this database is going to return nicely. I'm actually a little bit surprised I'm not seeing an error come back from, which has me slightly concerned. But what I'm going to try doing, oh, we're never actually calling this. That's what's happening. If we called this, we should expect to get an error back because that's not a valid database name, username, and password. That's where you're supposed to put in yours, and I have not yet put in mine because, you know, you're watching. So query DB, the way we can use that is, let me find an example here. Okay. So right here below it, let's call it. Let's say $ number of contacts equals query DB. And here we're going to select star. Now star is a wildcard. This is where we can indicate exactly which columns we want back from each row. Like maybe we only need last names, in which case there's faster ways it can give us just that. Star is kind of a slightly lazy way to deal with it, which for our prototyping purposes is actually often just fine at the scale we work at. But that star, again, will give us back all the fields. So for every row that I get, I can get back the first name, last name, address, time they were added to the database, and so on. And then I indicate the name of the name of the table, which let's go back to PHP MyAdmin to figure out. It's called contacts. So I'm going to select star from contacts. And then the next part, where, and here's where I can indicate that where, the last name is such and such, if I want to match to a certain last name. If I want to find a certain people who are only added today or earlier, I could indicate a mathematical expression on time added less than, certain timestamp. But I think actually, since we don't want anything specific like that, we can probably just do this, select star from contacts, and I think it's just going to give us all the entries back from contacts. Actually, we're going to rename this result from contact query, because that itself is not the number. There's another function we're going to call on it to get the number, and that number is echo. Well, let's see. This will be number of contacts equals MySQL num rows result from contact query. Whenever you have a long variable name with lots of characters in it, lots of capitalization from camel casing, I like to copy and paste it when I'm dealing with it multiple places. Again, just avoids all those little possibilities of typos. Because PHP will automatically create a variable for you every time you just start using it, it's very risky. It becomes a big problem for you at some point where you make a typo and suddenly you're stuck in a loop because you have a typo, so the variable you're incrementing isn't the one that's being checked to escape from the loop, or vice versa, or so on and so forth. But okay, so MySQL num rows give us back the number of entries that came back from this result. The result it gives back to us is actually kind of itself a bit of a complex data structure. There's multiple ways to navigate or deal with. The simplest of which is just to ask it, how many entries did you get back? MySQL num rows is how we do that. So now number of contacts should be echo. We got back number of contacts. Remember that the dollar sign is giving a semicolon at the end. That dollar sign here is giving PHP the clue that it can automatically fill it in, which works since we're using double quotes for our string. In PHP, you can use double and single quotes, and there's other ways to do strings, but in this case, we're doing that. And so we're going to try that. I anticipate we should get an error back from our function here that's doing our safety checks for us because of the fact that it's not my username, database, and password. I'm going to refresh that page. DB error code, access denied for user, your username at lccwest.scotech.edu using password yes. Okay, so there's the error that we expected to happen. Now what I'm going to do, so actually, well, first off, let's migrate this to another file. That's going to be really helpful for us because we're going to have lots of different files that are trying to access the database potentially. We don't want to have to copy and paste all this error handling code into different places, and that's where PHP's include functionality is incredibly helpful. So here's how we're going to do that. I'm going to go back to the server space where our index.php file is. So remember we've saved it, so it's the latest version. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to call this one query.php. Now I'm going to edit query.php. Again, using my text editor, so I'm making live changes on the web. I don't really need that text at the top. I only need the text at the bottom. I am keeping, let me zoom in on this for you. I am keeping at the top of the file the start of the PHP block, and at the bottom the end of the PHP block. I'm going to get rid of this echo and the database call. All I want in my query.php file is the definition of function query_db. Do you see that? And so that's also where my name, username, and password can live, all in this one PHP file. So this PHP file just starts PHP, defines the function, and then at the bottom terminates the PHP. I'm going to save that, so that's now its own value, and I can double check that. Edit, text edit. I should see in this new one. Okay, there it is. That's what I'm going to upload here to share with y'all. PHP block. There's the function we programmed. There's the closing block, and like I promised, there's the version that I'm going to upload for y'all in case you ran into typos and such. And now here, instead of defining the entire function here in index.php, I'm instead just going to write include query.php, and that's equivalent to me having typed that code from query.php into this file. And thanks to query.php being a PHP file instead of, say, like a text file, if someone tries to directly access it to get out our database passwords and stuff, remember, it's not calling the function, it's not echoing anything out, it's returning a blank text file to the browser. but here on the server, it's going to allow us to have that function wrapped up in that external file. And now here's how I'm going to solve my password conundrum that I've been running up against. What I'm going to do is, so here's my query.php file. I'm going to move this off the screen where you can't see it. Copy and paste in my, actually you can see my username, my database, and my username are both those values, which remember I got from db.iac.edu as part of that listing. And the password, once again, not your T-square, not your email address, is the one listed at db.iac.edu as part of your database setup, which I'm going to paste in there, save my file, close. So now, you never had to see it, but it's in my query.php, and it's being included in index.php, and when I refresh my index.php, refresh, we got back 2 contacts. That's pretty promising. So far, so good, because we expected 2 contacts. Now, maybe you're wondering, okay, well, how do we actually get back the text from them? Because that's all fine and dandy, but we want to look at these, right? So, what we do, search into second. Oof. One moment while I grab this up. Well, oof. I'm going to pull up a separate file here. We'll start these listings. There we go. I've got examples just laying around for me to reference from. There we go. Okay. I'm going to pull from that because that's already got the syntax that I want to make sure I don't make any typos while I'm showing you what to do. Lest you think I'm just pulling this all up top of my head, a lot of this, I've got notes around my screen. I'm working from old files I've already got. Don't think this is something somebody just memorizes. Okay, so like I said, the return result from our query DB is a slightly complicated data structure that we can get information from, like, okay, how many rows are there in there? Or we can navigate it, we can parse through it. And the way to do so is we say while $contact info, this variable name could be anything, it's just a temporary container, equals MySQL fetch assoc, that's short for associative array, which means that it's like an array, but instead of giving an index like 0, 1, 2, or 3, we can give it an index like last name, first name, and other strings that give us back the values within that row of the database. And then here we put the results that we got back from the query DB call. Result from contact query. Okay, notice these parentheses here are for MySQL fetch assoc. Notice that these parentheses here are for the while. And the way that this works is that MySQL fetch assoc pops one off from the list that came back as the results. So after getting this from it, then that becomes one shorter. And so it's going to keep doing this. As long as there's more contacts in there, it's going to keep popping them off and letting us use it inside the while loop. And once it runs out of them, it's going to proceed past the while loop, and that result structure will then have been gutted and no longer have the entries in it. Remember, this doesn't change the database. I just mean these results that we got back from our query. So this is how we can handle those. Now we can echo out contact info. Here's how we deal with that associative array. Last name. So there, you see contact info here is the temporary value that we're popping it into from MySQL fetch assoc. Last name is one of any of the fields here. It could be first name, could be last name, could be time added. In fact, let's say contact info my last name. We're using periods to concatenate. I'm going to put a comma space and then first name. Then I'm going to echo a breakline character, so it'll go into the next line. So we should see, after it says we got back X number of contacts, I'm going to put a break line there as well, so it'll go into the next line. We got back that number of contacts. Then it should go through the results that we got back from our query, pop them off one at a time, print out from each entry the last name, period to concatenate, comma space, period to concatenate, first name, new line, and then do the next entry, which we only have 2 entries so far, but we should expect to see it work. As a reminder as well, why did I bother concatenate this instead of just putting quotes around it like we did in this case? This is a matter of the fact that we're using associative arrays here. This complex structure involving the extra brackets and quotation marks prevents us from using the simple inline format that we can do if it's just a plain variable. So alternatively, what we could have done, this is an equivalent way of writing that line of code, at least in terms of the output, is I could say $ last name equals, actually I feel like that might confuse you. We'll say temp last name. We can say $ temp first name, and then I could echo out a statement that looks like temp last name, comma, temp first name. So instead of having these two lines, which use the periods to concatenate to as a way of working around the fact that we're dealing with associative arrays, thus we have to use the brackets and the quotes, we could separately create two temporary variables that individually grab those values from the associative array, making them local variables for us, at which time then we can echo out with these variables using the $ syntax inside the quotes, and these will be automatically filled in for us by PHP. But I'm going to go ahead and comment that block out. Remember, we can use the // or /* to // to comment out multiple lines of code. So this code will be ignored by the PHP. We just want to see that output. I'm going to save it. And when I refresh on that page, Deleon Chris, Bali, comma, Molly. And now just think for a second, like, this is a really powerful thing, right? So you've combined this with what we had in the earlier videos about the fact you can use a form in PHP, or actually just coming straight out of HTML, to submit get and post values into PHP. You can use those values sent from user forms in your SQL text. And if you're wondering, well, how do you write SQL queries? Well, SQL query. The internet's full of tips about how to write SQL queries. It's got tutorials on them. You can see it's got some basic structures, quizzes for you. And these are just W3 schools, which there's people who have their issues with. I think it's helpful for folks getting started out, certainly. And there's a lot of resources out there for how to write queries that'll do filtering and searches and combinations of tables, any of which you can do here to test out. And so let's try something now. Let's say we want to order these by the last name. Well, let's see. Order. Let me find an example of this. SQL order descending. Order by. And these are things you kind of get just used to having seen elsewhere to know to Google for. Okay, we got star from contacts, order by. We want to order by what we have. Earlier, Bali came second. Let's order by last name. So we're going to expect Bali to come first. And we could set ascending or descending, ASC or DSC. Let's say ascending. I'm going to refresh this page. We get Bali, Molly, then Deleon, Chris. If I say descending, it'll give us the opposite order. And again, in the same way that we can concatenate in, or that we can even just use direct string values from the variables that we get into strings we print to the screen or print to the HTML, we can use those in our SQL query to do really powerful things to interact with their database. So users can submit their own new names to the database, get their own contact information. Let's say we want to also print out the address. I'm going to put a break line at the end of this line. What do we call it? Addy, maybe? Address. Okay. There's the address. If I refresh this page, there we've got each of our addresses. And of course, you know, this is HTML. We can format this. We can put a bold around the names. /B to stop the bold. Uh-oh, I've done wrong. Oh, forgot a period here. And again, this is one of the reasons why when you're working with PHP, you want to make small changes at a time. There we go, Bali Molly. Let's give a little more white space between this section and the previous. Complete with our addresses. And actually, as one last thing, let's go and deal with that timestamp, because I know you might be wondering, what on earth are we to do with that? I think I got an example handy. I thought I did. Maybe I do not. Things. Yeah, we're going to deal with time and date stamps in a next video when we find a way to present those. There's enough complexity there. I don't want to try to cram it all in one place, and my example appears to have been closed by me. But that's it for now. So you've hopefully now comfortable with. Oh, I changed my mind. We're gonna go ahead and print out that date information, just because I did find my example up. So bonus material. There's our entries coming back. And now naively, we can see. So one of our columns is called time added. We can print that number straight out as is. So we can, let's put an extra space between database entries. Echo time added to database, colon. Remember, we have to refer to this on the name of the variable that we, or the associative array that we popped off from the result contact query. And that needs to be referenced as a string into the associative array. Let's go and we want a break line here after the address. Period, quotes with a break line there. Okay, so there we have the time added to the database. Let's say we want to present that as a time, as a date of something meaningful. And what we can do with that is there's something in PHP, there I got it even open, called date, and it returns a string of a given format. And there's a ton of ways we can format this. We can get the day of the month, we can get the day, we can get years, we can get abbreviations of months, we can get years with sort of placeholder values or different numbers of decimal points or significant digits rather. We can account for different time zones. What we're going to do is, okay, I hope this works because here we go. $, nice date equals date. LJS -OF FYHIS A. Again, I didn't memorize that. That's something straight out of practice. I use that somewhere else. I'm going to copy time added there into my second value. And instead of printing out contact info time added, I'm just going to move nice date there into the quotes. And if it worked, beautiful. There we go. Tuesday, 1st of October, 2013, 12:22:18 p.m. And if you look over here at our key for where that came from, we've got an L, we've got a JS of FY, so Y is the year. HIS is obviously hours, minutes, and seconds. I say obviously as if I would mean that. But that's where you've just got to use this PHP date guide from the manual to figure out how you can break it down to whatever form you want. So if we wanted to indicate textual representation of the day is 3 letters, so we could use capital D, it looks like. Let me change the first argument here to capital D. Save, and when I refresh this page, there, now we get the 3-letter abbreviation. Let's say I wanted to, numerical representation day of the week. So like 1 is Monday, and can't imagine why we'd want this, but it's the thing it does. 7th of week. Actually, I don't know if we can safely do that, so I'm not going to bother. Capital N will just give us that number. There we get 2 for Tuesday being the 2nd day, and so on. So this complicated, wonky string is a way you can bring together whatever format you want your date to be in to then print out more nicely than the ugly timestamp that by default is just an integer in the database. And actually, as a way you can check, I said earlier that the Unix timestamp is the number of seconds from a certain time in history. We could Google that, or if we just take this format we already have and convert the value 0 into a nice date, there we go. It looks like I'm counting for time zones here. 1969, December 31st, so it really is New Year's, January 1970. I think probably Greenwich time if I had to guess, but couldn't say for sure. So there we go. So we got the date displaying, showing how to do that. And again, most part, when I got to do it, I tend to just go back to my old examples and borrow from how I did it, or I'll just Google PHP's date code and try to make sense again of this format mess, because there's a lot of ways to deal with it. Hopefully it's been helpful. I'm going to continue to work on these in the following videos. We're probably going to start from closer to scratch in terms of next time we build up having forms to interact with this database. We might not use these same 2 entries. We might just sort of start from scratch on something that makes a little more sense. Thanks for joining so far. Hope it's been helpful. Chris Deleon, and catch you again soon. Thanks.